Good morning. Dallas. So excited to be here. Okay, I kind of hate podiums, but I do have written remarks, so I'll do my best. So I'm Esther Park, the CEO of Cienega Capital, which is part of the No Regrets Initiative. And today I'm going to be talking about regenerative economies through the lens of soil and what happens under the ground. And as I was looking for photos about soil health and soil economies, I found this photo. And it just so happened that it was drawn by a middle schooler right here in Texas. And it's a beautiful drawing, and talk about coloring outside the lines. I mean, this kid is probably in high school now, but I just loved that and thought I would share it with you. So Cienega Capital is part of the No Regrets Initiative. And the No Regrets Initiative, we're an ecosystem of entities with a common mission of regenerating the agricultural soils in North America and the communities that steward them. And so out of these organizations, we have Cienega Capital, which is the investing. We have philanthropy, the Globetrotter Foundation. We do farming and ranching ourselves at the Piscinas Ranch in the Central Coast of California. And we have the Piscinas Ranch Learning Center, which does education and community building. It's a 501c3. All right, so let's just get right into it. What is regenerative economy? So my good friend, before I go into this, regenerative agriculture, this is where it sort of all starts. Is anyone here familiar with regenerative agriculture? Okay, we've got a few hands up. Okay, so what is regenerative agriculture? It's a management system for prioritizing soil health so that we can have resilient ecosystems. And so it's based on that concept that my good friend John Fullerton at the Capital Institute came up with these 8 principles of regenerative economy. So it's very nature-based, and so we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into nature to see how did these concepts develop? Why are these the 8 principles? And why should we take a cue from nature? Like, why? Well, our relatives, the rocks, the trees, the water, the microbes, they've been doing this living on Earth thing on this planet for billions of years longer than we have, right? So I think they probably know a thing or two about how to live on this planet. And so let's just take a little bit of a look and see what they have to teach us. All right, so I'm going to take you back to middle school biology. For some of us, that's a little bit farther away than others. So we're just going to go back and review some of these concepts. Okay, so when we were back in middle school, we learned that green plants use photosynthesis to convert light, carbon dioxide, and water into carbohydrates and sugars. And carbohydrates and sugars translates into food, at least for plants. If you're on a keto diet, it doesn't apply. But fairly recently, scientists discovered that plants were making more of these sugars than they needed, and that they were leaking them through their roots. And scientists thought, well, that's weird. Why would they do that? So it turns out that there's a whole economy going on underground. So this is a very simplified picture. You see some roots, you see some water, but not much else. It turns out that actually in a single teaspoon of soil, there are 6 billion microbes. In a cup of soil, there are more microbes than there have ever been human beings on this earth. And think about that in terms of scale and how much of this planet that covers. So underneath the soil, there's actually a really complex web of microorganisms, fungi, nematodes, bacteria, and all those plant roots. And they're all working together. There's an exchange going on there. And so it turns out that all those extra sugars that the roots are leaking into the soil aren't actually leaking. They're exuding them on purpose. And why are they doing that? They do that because when they put the sugars out, they feed all of that life under the ground, and that life under the ground feeds them back. So it's in exchange. I'll give you sugars, and you give me micronutrients. You give me minerals. You give me vitamins. And that's actually what's happening down there. So it is an economy, right? There's exchange going on. There's commerce in a way. So that's super exciting. The other thing that's interesting about this is that it's a mutualistic relationship. No one microorganism can survive without the other, right? So everyone gets what they need. Everyone thrives. There's no winners. There's no losers. And there's no hoarders. All right, so let's keep going. One of the more interesting things is that fungi in particular, and if you're looking at this picture, this is a mycorrhizal fungal network. So one single plant can create these relationships with fungi that look like that under the ground. So look at what it is above ground. It's so tiny, but underneath the ground, this is what's possible. And if you can imagine that there's more plants above that ground, all those networks start to blend together. So, this creates the most effective nutrient management for the plants. And if you think about fungi, usually when we think about that, we think about mushrooms, or we think about that moldy thing going on in the back of your refrigerator, and it's usually like, oh, that's gross, but actually it's really cool, and it's really necessary for life. So these underground networks can stretch for miles, and there have been some articles recently about how trees can communicate through their root systems, and it's because of these fungal networks. So they're not just nutrient highways, but they're also communication highways. There also has been some research that has shown that when pest or disease affects a plant or a series of plants, that miles down the road, you can have plants starting to behave differently. Because through that fungal network, they hear, oh, there's pest, or oh, there's disease, and then they start to behave differently. So they uptake different nutrients, and they exhibit different properties to make them less susceptible to those things. So they are communicating under the ground, which is super exciting. All right, super amazing fungal networks. Okay, I'm giving you a really gross simplification of how this works underground, and if there's any scientists among you, you know that I haven't done it justice, but this is just for heuristic purposes. We're not trying to learn middle school biology, and we're not trying to get to college level biology either, right? All right, so we do know that these are the oldest and most sophisticated systems in nature, and they're the basis for the entirety of terrestrial life on this earth. So we need to pay attention to these. Okay, so now I'm going to turn to the concepts of diversity and complexity. Natural systems are inherently diverse and complex. But if you look at modern day farming, what does that look like? Would you call that diverse and complex? No, that's a mining operation is what it is. It's completely extractive. And farming methods today can be defined by scarcity, a scarcity mentality, and we'll revisit that in a second. But because we believed that plants competed with one another for scarce resources in the soil, we had the great idea of taking out everything that wasn't the thing we were growing for food, and we just set up a monocrop in the middle of bare soil. So this is what we've done. We've taken all the diversity out of that natural system because we're just going to grow whatever that is. In that case, I don't know. That might be soy, or it could be early corn. So, this is what a natural system more likely looks like, right? Diverse trees, shrubs, grasses. I don't have any animals in this picture, but you can imagine grazing animals and all sorts of wildlife. And so we need this diversity for a very important reason, because each plant develops different relationships with the microbes under the ground, right? So if you just have one kind of plant, you're only fostering one kind of microbe. But if you have a diversity of plants, then you're starting to foster a more diverse underground, right? So then you can get more nutrients, you can get more health from that system as a result. So we need these roots going down at different depths, creating these relationships with the microbes, and fostering the life that you see above ground, which is way more beautiful than this thing, frankly. All right, so without a diverse above ground, we can't have a diverse underground, right? And this is actually why farmers have to put in so many nutrients. This is why they're applying nitrogen fertilizer. This is why they're having to apply herbicides and insecticides, because the soil isn't healthy. They haven't fostered that below ground health to be able to grow the plants that they want to grow. All right, so just a little story. I was at a workshop a few years ago, and it was a soil health workshop, and there was a soil scientist there, and I can nerd out with the best of them on soil science. And we were looking in a dirt pit, so they had like dug a huge trench, and we were sort of looking at what was going on. And she says, "This is biological warfare." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "There's all these microbes and there's all these bacteria down here. And actually, because of the diversity of what's going on down there, like they keep each other in check, right? So the good microbes, the bad microbes, the good bacteria, the bad bacteria, they're all kind of, sort of in that mix. But if you start to take the diversity out of that system, then any one of those bacteria can really become a problem. It can grow unchecked, and it can create huge problems. So, periodically we hear about sort of E. coli contamination in a lot of our food. And I actually believe it's because we lack diversity in our agricultural systems. And so that E. coli bacteria doesn't have the other bacteria to keep it in check, so it just goes crazy. And that's why that diversity is essential, right? It keeps everybody else in check. So I'll let you make that leap to human systems. All right, diverse systems are also incredibly complex. There's a thing in biology, and now they're starting to use it in robotics and computing, called quorum sensing. So in the soil, it means that when there is a sufficient diversity of microbes, they start to act differently. So you could track, okay, this microbe does this microbe does that, this microbe does that. But when they get together and when there's a sufficient diversity of them together, they start to create behaviors and effects that not one of them could produce on their own, right? So it's the group effect, and it's the diversity of this group that allows that to happen. So this is phenomenal. This is highly complex. It's totally indeterminate. And there's no predicting what the effects will be when any group of microbes come together. We don't know. We just know that they start to behave differently as a group. And we also know that they're incredibly contextual, right? So they respond to their environment contextually in whatever way serves the whole. So this complexity is necessary for the resilience of the system. All right, so you'll see that I'm putting up some principles of the regenerative economy up there just to kind of tie it back. All right, so if we think about this underground system, does that look to you like modern day economics today? Is that what's happening right now? All right, so I would say no. Capitalist economies have scarcity and accumulation at its core, right? And by swallowing up assets and creating systems of private ownership, scarcity is created and wealth is built, primarily by controlling the factors of production. Okay, so this gets a little bit harder. We're now graduating to high school economics. Okay? All right. So, wealth is created by controlling the factors of production. What are the factors of production? Anybody really close to high school economics? Okay. Factors of production are land, labor, and rents. Rents means ideas, technologies. And so if you can control those, then you can build wealth in a capitalistic economy, right? And we see that. That the wealthy tend to be able to control land and control labor. So if we go back to the days of colonization and the creation of this country, how did we create wealth in this country? Well, we stole land from the Native Americans. We stole labor by enslaving Africans and bringing them to this country. And even today, we continue to exploit immigrants in our agricultural economies, right? And we have also then co-opted a lot of the ideas and the technologies, the low-tech technologies that many of those folks brought from their own agricultural systems, right? So that's how we created wealth. That's not a pretty picture, is it? All right, so we've done a good job exploiting these, and we've done a good job of creating lots of wealth. And we're creating huge wealth disparities as a result. So, and I will go a step further to say our entire economic engine is built upon the premise of extraction as a fundamental right of white supremacy and the patriarchy. Okay, so if we continue down this path of chewing up nature and people, we're dooming ourselves as a species. All right, so it went a little bit dark there. Okay, but we're gonna get to hope, I promise. Okay, the good news is that nature is a resilient teacher, and we can learn. We just have to pay attention. All right, so I have a few suggestions. 1, be the fungi. Okay, so I've heard it pronounced fungi and fungi. I don't know. Fungi. You can be the fun guy too if you want. All right. So fungi are great at distributing resources, balancing everyone's needs, and creating pathways for relationships that serve the whole. So colonization created an economy that was driven by unchecked wealth accumulation, and investment tends to follow suit, right? So that's what our investing is about. Investing is to accumulate wealth. That's typically how it's been done in this country. Most financing vehicles are designed to harness the assets of the wealthy to create even more wealth for those few while extracting it for communities. Ask any investor, and in fact, any investor panel that I have been on likes to talk about 3 things. Pick any 3 from that left-hand column, right? What's your risk-return profile? And if you're a social investor, how are you measuring your impact? Does this solution scale? Can we get to efficiency? These are the things, right? These are the things that have driven our economy. These are the things that have driven wealth accumulation. And these are the things that people want to talk about when they talk about investing. All right, so for us as actors in the economic system, I would suggest a reframing. Let's color outside those stupid lines, because in my mind, they are stupid. And so at Cienega Capital, we don't define our work in terms of risk, return, metrics, or scale. We define our work as being beauty, complexity, resilience, and relationships. How's that for an investor? Have you ever heard an investor talk about that? But that's what we talk about. That's what we're going for. That's what we're trying to build in our portfolio. So I know this sounds woo-woo, and yes, I am from California, but again, I think we need a drastic reframing if we're gonna do things differently. There's a lot of words on this slide, and you don't have to worry about them, but basically what we're trying to do in the work that we do, including, so not just the investing, but the philanthropy and the ranch and the nonprofit, We're trying to create a more healthy ecosystem in terms of people, but also under the ground. So you see in this picture that we dedicate way more space to under the ground than we do to above the ground. So we hope to act as and promote a functional and healthy ecosystem that is inclusive of all of our relatives in the natural world. Be the fungi, or the fungi, depending on your preference. Okay, number 2, be the cobbler. Okay, what does that mean? So we all know the Cinderella story, right? Once upon a time, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so basically there's a prince, there's a glass slipper, and there's a woman. Okay, so here comes the prince with a glass slipper, which is horribly uncomfortable and impractical, by the way, if you've ever worn a shoe. And every woman in town is trying to fit her dang foot into that shoe. Like, please, come on, let me put my foot in this shoe. Why? Because the promise of a lavish and carefree life at the top of the hill in the castle with the prince is like too much to not have to try for, right? But what about everyone else? Like, that's great for Cinderella, but what about everybody else? Okay, so make Prince Charming the investor and make every woman in the village an entrepreneur, right? Isn't that what's really happening out there? All right. So too often, I think, investors act like Prince Charming, when in fact we should be more like the village cobbler. So our approach at Cienega is, girl, you need a shoe? Come on in. Let's build you a shoe. Tell me what you need it for. Tell me how long it needs to last. Tell me, what you need for your own comfort and your own lifestyle. And we'll make a shoe. And if we make a shoe, then we can make lots of shoes. And we can outfit lots of women in way more comfortable shoes than glass slippers, frankly, right? So this is what we're trying to do with our investing. And this notion is sometimes called integrated capital, which means, let's use all the tools and all the materials available to make as many shoes for as many people as possible. So in the ecosystem of the things that we do, we try to utilize all kinds of capital. We use grants, we use loans, we use equity investments. We've done land purchases, and we've even done a joint venture. Right? And so by being able to leverage all these different types of capital, we're able to serve a lot more entrepreneurs out there. All right, so be the cobbler. Be of service, not the savior. Okay, number 3, be the tree. All right, in capitalist economics, the goal is to accumulate wealth and often to hoard it. And in some cases, try and control it from the grave. Yeah, we've never seen that happen, right? All right, but this goes against nature, and we can see trees as a great example of how to flow resources. I took this picture last weekend when I was at the park for my son's soccer game, and I noticed, look what's going on here. There's a tree. There's a lot of dry, dead grass. I mean, in California, we're subject to lots of drought, and so, they're not watering it, obviously. But whoa, look at this green circle that's under the tree. What's that about? You might say that that's because of shade, and because, the sun isn't able to essentially dry up and burn that grass. But that may be part of it. But also, because the tree has such significant root systems, it's able to generate that life right there at its root system. So with trees, green, photosynthesis, carbon dioxide, carbohydrates, and then soil, microbes, and that's coming back. And it's giving life to everything that's underneath that tree. So that's pretty cool. I took this picture last year at Piscinas Ranch, and if you can see, so this is a different time of year. The grass is green. It is an overcast day, so we're not looking at any shadows, but if you look under these trees, the grass is a lot greener, isn't it? That's not a shadow. That's actually because there's so much life happening there. And trees are so resourceful because they generate so much photosynthesis, right? So they're creating this beautiful, lovely community around them as a result of that. And we have found that in the process of trying to regenerate the land at the ranch, that the area around trees tends to have the fastest regeneration. That's where life really starts to come back more quickly than other places. Also, when a tree is dying, so it doesn't hoard its resources. Oh, I'm dying, I gotta keep it, I gotta keep it, I gotta keep it. When it's dying, it actually pushes everything out. It pushes all its nutrients, it pushes all its resources out. It gives it to the community before it dies. That's what we need to do, right? All right, so our goal at No Regrets is to make money move, not to let it sit around, not to let it accumulate, and not even to really let it grow. It's gonna grow somewhere else, but it's not gonna grow in our house. So we just try to push it out as fast as we can. Our foundation is in a spend down. We're in a 10-year spend down because that money's not gonna hang around. Our problems are too pressing. We can't hang on to that money. We gotta push it out. All right, be the tree. And lastly, be the magic. What does this even mean? Why am I talking about magic at an investing conference? What does magic have to do with investing? So again, I'm not a scientist, but you can tell like I like to nerd out on stuff like that. There's this whole field called quantum physics. Anybody familiar with quantum physics? Great. So basically, quantum physics as a field was developed by scientists to explain the things that they can't explain, right? So it's like, oh, we can't explain this. It's quantum physics. I mean, that's a very gross simplification again. But the whole thing is like, you know, we have learned in science to describe things in a very one-dimensional linear way, right? Math, 1 + 1 = 2, right? And it's very linear. But as I just mentioned, like nature doesn't work that way. We saw with quorum sensing that there's this magic that happens when there's a certain diversity of microbial life. Similarly, in quantum physics, they found that there is this magic thing that happens sometimes in nature, and they can't totally explain it through linear mathematics. So thus, quantum physics. Within quantum physics, there's a concept called quantum entanglement. And this is really cool, and this is something we talk about on my team a lot. So quantum entanglement is actually the ability for a molecule to affect another molecule without even touching each other, without even being in the same space. So they're spatially separated, and yet how are they affecting each other? I don't know, but they call it quantum entanglement. And actually, Albert Einstein, when he learned about this concept, he was so disturbed that he called it spooky action at a distance. Magic, right? There's this unexplainable thing that you can't explain with science. Since the Enlightenment, we've been going down this path of like science, everything, numbers, everything. That's the only way we can know a thing is right. That's the only way we can know a thing is true. But is that really true? We've been devaluing other ways of knowing things. I call them original ways of knowing things, right? We can know things in our heart, and we can know things in our gut, and we can know things in our head. But we prioritize as a society the things that you can know in our heads, right? But on our team, we actually really prioritize what we know in our hearts and in our guts just as much as what we know in our heads. And it makes for really wonky decision-making sometimes. Like, you know, we'll be talking about something and like, oh, this is the thing to do and this seems really great. And somebody will be like, you know what, that just doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't feel right in my gut. And we'll all sit up and go, okay, we're not doing that. I mean, what is that? I mean, how do you explain that to anybody? You can't. But we embrace it. We embrace the magic of the fact that there is a wisdom that we have in our bodies that exists outside of sort of the rational mind. So, I would say that if science can come up with a whole field called quantum physics to deal with the whole unknown aspect of things, to deal with magic, I think we can too. One of the reasons that I tend to say no to impact metrics, and I know that tends to be really important in impact investing, but I usually say no to impact metrics because that just leads us down the path of linear, one-dimensional thinking. And if we go down that path, that's the result that we're going to get. We have to think more expansively. We need to think more broadly, and we need to accept the things that we don't know, right? It's okay to not know. It's okay to not know the outcome. It's okay to not know what's happening right now. That's okay. We should embrace that. There's actually really beautiful stuff that can happen if you do. So, we've seen some pretty amazing results on our team as a result of trusting the heart wisdom and the gut wisdom of our team and of the people in our ecosystem. Be the magic. All right. Can we imagine ourselves as bacteria, fungi, nematodes, and root systems? Can we create an economic system that has reciprocity and abundance as its core values? We can, and we must. Our literal survival depends on it. Thank you.